Hey everybody, welcome to Connecting Cannabis, brought to you by Wrazel. I'm your host, Brian Haller. Today's guest is Eric Goepel, the founder of Veterans Cannabis Coalition. We're going to be talking to him about what the Veterans Cannabis Coalition is, veterans issues, how cannabis can help and affect, and just kind of the whole political process around all of that. It's going to be really, really exciting, and I'm thrilled to have him here. But of course, we're going to need to listen to our sponsor first. So here is a word from them. Ojai Energetics has the most advanced water-soluble CBD on the market. Its fast-acting, most viable products are made without synthetics. Most users feel the benefits with proper dosage in under 30 seconds, not 30 minutes like a regular CBD rich oil. Their products are created using organic ingredients and regenerative farming practices benefiting both people and the planet. Ojai Energetics provides CBD users with a dependable bridge to optimal living, promoting everyday health and well-being. To see their products, visit OhioEnergetics.com. And to learn more about their current investment opportunity, visit their profile in the Wrazel investment marketplace at Wrazel.com. Welcome back, everybody. Eric, how are you, sir?
Good, Brian. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you. Thank you for joining us today. I really appreciate it. Let's hop right in. What's the Veterans Cannabis Coalition?
So the Veterans Cannabis Coalition is an independent, self-funded organization that's dedicated to ending federal cannabis prohibition and driving the research and development of cannabis-based medicines through the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Excellent. There you go. That's right.
In a short bit.
In a nutshell, exactly. We're just trying to, bring more awareness to the needs of veterans and simultaneously destigmatize and push cannabis towards legalization.
Exactly, and one of our main things is that there's a veteran in every community, right? So veterans as a group are pretty well represented throughout the United States, and the physical and mental challenges that physical and mental health challenges, that veterans face are not unique by any means to veterans.
Sure,
but they are often well known and are certainly associated with vets.
Oh yes.
And that opens up this experience in terms of how veterans use cannabis and the impact on these very complex injuries that a lot of them are dealing with.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you said that, the first thing that popped into my mind was PTSD, right? Obviously, tons of people experience this for many, many reasons, sure, but we tend to associate it with veterans, for obvious reasons.
Sure. Well, I mean, war trauma is, I think, one of the most well understood sources, certainly, of PTSD. However, really any trauma can be a source. A car accident,
right,
a sexual assault,
mm-hmm,
experiencing childhood trauma,
right,
or CTE, or what do they call that? Early childhood trauma.
Early childhood trauma. Although CTE could cause it as well.
Right.
Which is interestingly enough. Yeah.
Right, and of course, you have especially in the veteran community, quite a bit of overlap between PTSD and brain injury.
That's right.
And one of the things that we've seen in the research is that there is more than likely a large undiagnosed brain injury population among veterans who have been misdiagnosed as having PTSD, because PTSD and TBI often mirror each other in their symptoms.
That would make sense. And
not every vet gets an MRI or a CAT scan.
It's
like, and if you had what they would call a mild or more moderate traumatic brain injury, like a concussion,
right,
like a non-penetrating injury or something maybe that didn't happen in combat that didn't get recorded, or a training issue, which is, how many vets have had injuries during training that never really got reported that ended up being a significant issue later in life. Yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm walking up the stairs, to the office today. It's just, like I'm walking on Rice Krispies, right?
Oh yeah,
that's 6 years of airborne.
Yeah, and that's just wear and tear. That's not PTSD. That's not anything. That's just normal course of action. So, a very good point. In fact, that's a great point, because of all the ample, research that's been done around cannabis as a, healing pain, etc., using, making your muscles a little more, malleable, as I should say. So let's backtrack a little then. You're clearly passionate as can be about the subject. Let's tell everybody your background. So you were in the Army.
Right. So I'm an Army veteran myself.
That's right.
I served for 7 years. I worked as a communications and intelligence support guy in a special operations unit.
That's right.
And during that time, I did 2 tours in Iraq and 1 in the Philippines. After that, worked as a defense contractor in Afghanistan for a year before I ended up returning to the States, more or less, to finish out my degree. And then in 2016, I ended up in D.C. As a legislative fellow in the Senate office.
Yep.
And then from there, worked at the American Legion. And then in basically between my time in DC, came to this conclusion that there needed to be a persistent and professional representation of veterans who use cannabis on Capitol Hill. That was missing, and then I think is still largely missing.
So was that kind of generated, like, was that kind of knowledge generated through your time, let's say with the American Legion, or was it like more, you know,
my Veterans Cannabis Coalition co-founder is a gentleman named Bill Ferguson, also an Iraq War veteran, and one of the founding members of Iraq and Afghanistan Veterans of America, and someone who played an important role in lobbying for the post 9/11 GI Bill.
That's right.
Which early IAVA was a big proponent. Bill has far more experience on the especially on the lobbying side of the Hill than I do. So when we came together as veterans, as cannabis users who use cannabis to treat our service-connected issues, that was a topic of conversation regularly. Like, how are we going to make, how would we, blue skying it?
Yeah, sure.
How would we make this a reality? Not just, having, state legal access, but cannabis through the VA.
Right.
Not quite what they do in Canada, but, or at least maybe something similar. But they do like a reimbursement program. But, there are certainly other examples that we have currently of how cannabis has been integrated into medicine, and certainly on an anecdotal level and borne out in the research. We've seen that cannabis has just an immense variety of potential medical applications.
Yep.
And in veterans who deal with two major issues that cannabis, I think, helps with in terms of veterans often deal with polypharmacy, which is, the taking of multiple medications all at the same time, and often taking medications to treat the side effects of other, your primary medications.
Yeah, it's like, it's described often as a rabbit hole. Like, you have X amount of symptoms, so I need these 3 like medications, and that's already kind of a lot. And then it's like, oh, well, I get, dry mouth, or I'm lethargic. Oh, well, you need this one. And then you need this one to battle that. Next thing you know, you're taking, 10 different pills, and gosh knows what they're doing to your body.
I mean, PTSD is a great example of how you can have one indication or one condition and end up on, several medications, right?
Yes.
Because PTSD is both a physiological and a mental disorder.
That's right.
In terms of, your amygdala basically gets caught in like this, it has like explain this, probably a little loosely, but essentially it gets caught in this, your fight or flight complex, or your fight or flight reflex is constantly like
Triggered. Yeah, it's
right.
Yeah, it's basically
just, and it's pressed every time you have a experience that is similar to whatever the triggering trauma.
Correct.
The initial
or it could just be
was.
like a sound or something that like just makes you think of that moment, and then boom, you're right back.
Right. There's a lot of different ways that PTSD can be triggered.
Certainly.
And of course, there's immense degrees of severity.
Of course.
People with mild and to completely debilitating. Folks who really cannot leave the house, and those veterans like that are obviously also at the most risk of suicide and overdose. It's you're trapped within your condition, and then you're saddled with the effects of your medications, and nothing is really offering a pathway out.
Yeah, and veteran suicide, another humongous topic that doesn't get talked about, I don't think, as much as it should. Do you think that do you think cannabis could help that rate?
Oh, most definitely. Yeah. I mean, this has been something that's, I think, been borne out, anecdotally.
It does look like it.
I mean, we've talked, we've spoken with, thousands of veterans across the country.
Sure.
From every generation.
Yep.
Men, women, of all, backgrounds and generations in terms of how they use cannabis and the effects that they've had. And it's like, it's the number of times that we've heard this exact same story. I came back. I was, I had physical and mental health issues, right? I got prescribed these 5 to 15 medications that I was taking that made me feel like a zombie or a rage addict, or, like in a constant, fog or whatever, right? Essentially like pretty debilitating.
Yes.
On top of not really treating the underlying conditions.
No, just mitigating it.
Mitigating it sometimes.
Yes.
Right. And then, someone usually turns them on to cannabis.
Yep.
Right. Someone gives them the joint, maybe, an edible or something of that nature, right? And then all of a sudden it's like, I can sleep for the first time in years.
Yes.
Or, I can get more than 3 hours of sleep in a night.
If I had a nickel for every time I've heard that story, I mean, in all sincerity, like I know you and I aren't scientists and we can't sit here and say definitively 100% anything.
Sure.
But boy, have you ever heard the opposite?
Well, I mean, real scientists would say nothing's definitive anyway.
That's right, exactly. It's all kind of going, right?
But of course, that's not the face that we get as patients. We get this surety, like, hey, this is going to help.
Yep.
And I'm not one to take shots at the medical community, but at the same time, there is a doctor responsibility, and having done the research and having looked at the same data that's available to these doctors, yes. I can tell you without a doubt, giving someone Xanax for more than a year, there's no evidence to support that.
No.
Right. There's very little evidence to support a lot of the way that medicine is prescribed, and the fact that doctors, prescribe so many things off-label on top of that, yes. Which is like, okay, you are now admitting that there is very like this very weak association with this thing. Otherwise, if it was strong, then they would have gotten indicated for that.
Yes.
Right? And they weren't trying to do that.
No, they're trying to just kind of push it along. So, clearly there's a lot of hindrances, very much real and self-imposed essentially towards getting cannabis in the hands of veterans, right? And we could have a whole conversation about that all day long. Since 2008, California Lightworks has been guided by a vision focused on the research, design, development, and manufacturing of state-of-the-art commercial LED grow lights and automation equipment for greenhouse and indoor horticulture. By applying the latest advances in high-efficiency, solid-state lighting and controls technology, their team provides worldwide growers new grow lights that deliver clear benefits at a competitive price. Backed by their solid reputation for standing behind their products, California Lightworks also offers industry-leading warranties on all their commercial grow lights. To learn more about California Lightworks, go to californialightworks.com, and to view their current investment opportunity, please go to the investment marketplace at Wrazel.com. So, how do you fight back then?
Well, I mean, it's a legal issue, so I mean, you have to change the law.
That's right.
It's cannabis prohibition has existed at a federal level, at least since in some way, shape, or form since 1937, the passage of the Marijuana Tax Act. Now, that is the basis of prohibition. And if anyone who's been in the cannabis community is probably familiar with the name Harry J. Anslinger, but the man was an out and out racist, right? He basically spent 7 years ginning up as much racist vitriol and, anti-scientific or scientifically meritless evidence to try to convince Congress that cannabis was something that needed to be controlled, to protect the youth.
Yep.
Right. Like he called it the assassin of youth.
That's right.
Right. He also said a lot of horrible things about Latinos and Black Americans.
He did.
Right. In terms of associating them with basically
he's essentially the chief architect of the propaganda that began to infiltrate the U.S. and around that time.
And, in his position, which he served for, I think, over 30 years. So he was basically the top Fed for drug policy,
for 30 years.
For 30 years, up until, the creation of the DEA and,
all sorts of fun things, yes.
Beginning of the real drug war in 1971.
Yes.
So, that's self-imposed.
Yes.
Right. There was never any merit to the way that the federal government has treated cannabis from the inception of federal drug control.
Correct.
And we have, obvious and conclusive evidence that it was based on a racist lie.
Essentially, so it was really pushed by that one person more than anything.
And we're in a position where we're having to produce extraordinary evidence to basically push back against something that was generated with no evidence.
That's correct.
And this is the exact opposite of how things are supposed to work.
That's right. Yeah.
And so whenever you hear any politician, hemming or hawing about like their position on cannabis, it's like, just, throw out an Anslinger quote. It's like, that's the guy who got it prohibited on the basis of that.
Yeah. Do you agree with that?
Do you agree with that? No. No. So, I mean, it's,
I guess on the upside, it is a legal issue, and you're making it's kind of interesting because I'm feeling optimistic, even though the whole conversation is like, yikes, but
life's a long time.
You're making me realize that we're now in a position where we can compromise, certainly one party that I can think of with regards to kind of showing that. But I think any politician is going to be compromised if you basically paint that kind of parallel for them, or to say like, okay, why? And this is actually goes to, I think it speaks to a problem that we just have in general. We stay on the surface and we don't go deep enough. Right. So if you say, you know, I'm for cannabis, why? Right? Or I'm not for cannabis, how come? Right? No one really says, you know, that except for, you know, handfuls of people, or this kind of a situation here, obviously. So I would want to know what you would want to say to the person who says, I don't believe any, like, cannabis is the devil's weed, it's the worst thing ever.
So I try to figure out what their real objection is. Right. Right. It's like, do you object to this because you think it like changes people's behavior?
Sure.
Do you object to it because you think it's has no medical value?
Right.
Or do you think it has like a negative health effect?
Right.
Right. And to all of those things,
yes,
I will say, I can provide, you know, counter examples.
That's right.
And so, you know, does it change people's behavior? Sure. I mean, it's a psychotropic drug.
Yeah.
Right. That is also true of every other psychotropic drug, of which there are many legal ones, which have obviously far worse and much more and much better documented negative effects.
Yep.
You know, probably the top being alcohol.
Yeah.
It's a psychoactive drug.
Yes.
Right. It is a drug as well.
Or opioids, probably a big one too.
You know, and opioids. You know, and this, I'm glad you actually brought up opioids, because that's sort of like one of that surface deep issues, right? On the surface, the federal government has said opioids are bad.
Yes.
Right? The CDC has come out with these prescribing guidelines, and that has been reflected in the way that veterans especially have gotten pain management, right?
Okay.
So the VA has made a very big point to show that they are drastically cutting back on the amount of opioids prescribed.
Yeah.
We're actually at a 20-year low in opioid prescribing.
Well, it's a good thing, I guess.
You would think,
but yet
the opioid overdose deaths aren't going down. So why is that? Well, it's because the people overdosing on opioids, even in the early phases of this crisis, of which there are now like 3 or 4 different waves of this.
Yeah.
Because this has been happening over a 20-year period.
Yep.
So the current wave that we're in, right, we're the fentanyl wave essentially.
Yes.
Is you now have millions of people who were on controlled, known dose opioids, right? Clean, you know, that they tolerated,
right?
That were now being abandoned left and right by doctors. And what are they given as an option, as an alternative? Gabapentin. All right, lots of issues there. Gabapentin or gabapentinoids, you know, Lyrica, Neurotonin. Those are also now very popular in the VA as, you know, opioid alternatives for pain management. You know, it's.
Say, I wonder if do you know a natural plant-based option that might, you know, suffice? And so, I mean, we could talk about that forever too. Like again, you know,
it all
overlaps, and it's very interesting. One thing that I love about, you know, you and the Veterans Cannabis Coalition is you can't fit into any of these prescribed boxes. Well, you can't. You do like, well, wait, you're a veteran, so these people really like you. Oh, you're pro-cannabis, so these people. Oh, you're a nonprofit, so you're these folks, right? Like it's good, I think.
Well, I mean,
it allows you flexibility.
I mean, you know, my partner and I were citizens, right? You know, we're self-funded, we're independent.
Yep.
You know, so we get to do and say what we want to do and say, and I can basically allow the evidence to guide me, right?
Yep.
I don't have to prescribe to any one organization's mission or, you know, party line or anything like that.
Yep.
And as a result, you realize there's plenty of criticism that you can throw in every direction.
Of course.
In our political our political system. So, and there are so many different sectors of our society that are invested in keeping cannabis prohibited. So how do you, as an individual that's trying to work to represent a much broader community, and that's working with that community to try to better represent themselves?
Yes.
You know, how do you change that? You know, luckily you don't have to change every mind.
Right. Yeah.
Because we work in a
system. You got to change enough.
Well, and honestly, you really have to change about 3 people's minds. Right?
Well, the 3 main, yes.
Right. Senate Majority Leader,
that's right.
Speaker of the House, and the President.
That's pretty much right.
Those are the three people who have the future of cannabis in their hands, whoever they are in the future.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep. Doesn't matter who they are,
wherever they are.
Where they reside. Yes.
And below them, you probably have maybe about 16 more members of Congress who are also very important to making that happen. But out of a 535 member body, we're not talking about a lot of people.
We're talking maybe 20 folks.
I mean, and when you start to break it down to that, it's like now it suddenly seems a lot more doable. Not so much because it's easier to move those 20 people, because it's not.
No, but
it's like, where to go.
Yeah, you can at least focus on like, listen, this is really, yes, they have extended, people that you'll have to navigate through, and they have their own teams, et cetera.
It's a lot like the military, right?
Yeah,
like
right.
You're doing like a network analysis, and you're trying to figure out like who's related to who, and what do these people owe each other, and like what's their relationship.
You're talking about account-based marketing as well,
right,
which
CRM,
is like,
right.
Yeah, I don't want to, I'm not going to go after all the businesses. I'm just going to go after this one. So I need a relationship chart. I need to understand who to get to this person, and whose team runs by who, and whoever.
We're very niche, right?
Yes, so, and they just market to that.
Basically. Yeah, we're not trying to change, as much as I would love to change the FDA process too, in addition to, legalizing cannabis, right? Like we're just taking one thing at a time.
Let's try to, I hear you. I hear you there, of course, and I don't know. It's good to have this conversation because, it's just so much around veterans' needs, but also just in general cannabis usage and kind of a stigma that needs to be kind of just eradicated, to be honest with you. I think a large portion of the resistance that you and others get is due to that. It's your boy in 1937,
sure,
right? And ultimately, Wrazel seeks to do that from kind of a business angle,
very
right?
Important.
Hey, we're going to bring in, investors and new opportunities and things like that.
Without money, essentially, there is no legalization.
That's exactly right.
And that money is going to have to come from the business community, because cannabis advocates have been doing this for 50 years. And if we could have paid for it by now, I think we would have.
Yes.
But now that we're looking at a legal multi-billion-dollar industry in this country.
You got a lot more people with skin in the game. You got a lot more people who, for whatever reasons, would like the bar to tilt the way that you were trying to push it.
Sure. And I think the best way to approach ending federal prohibition is not necessarily to create a burdensome federal program that now nickels and dimes everybody. I've seen legislation that I've liked in D.C. that would legalize, but they also throw things on like a 5% excise tax, and it's like, okay, what other product is taxed at 5% at a federal excise? Nothing. Right, alcohol and tobacco, not even close.
Yep.
Right, and it's like, why are consumers and patients paying that tax?
That's right.
Right, why isn't that money for social equity not coming out of the DOJ budget, or DHS, or any of these other or DOD for that matter?
Do you think it's more greed or a lack of understanding?
I think it's just more like lack of creativity, to be honest.
So kind of a merging of both.
Yeah, a little bit
of both. Yeah. That's right.
I think people and politicians in general are reactive. Yeah. Right. It's generally lobbyists and advocates or activists who end up writing most of the legislation. When I say most, they end up writing a not insignificant portion of the legislation.
Yes.
That actually ends up being passed. So, and because that's who Congress goes to. It's like, you're the experts, you're in the industry, you're on the street, like, this issue better than we do. So tell us what needs to change.
Right.
That's how it should happen. Generally, and that's how it has historically happened in the past, where Congress is essentially taking input from the community, and you've kind of seen that in the last couple of years with the rise in because we testified before the House Small Business Committee last year, just this month last year, basically saying a lot of the things we're saying now. This was a system based in meritless system. Yep. It's negatively impacting not just veterans, the health of every human being in this country and really the world. Because the United States props up global global drug prohibition in general, but certainly global cannabis prohibition.
Yes.
And taking all that, and once you start to see the sort of the scale and the scope of impact in changing just this one thing, ending cannabis prohibition in this country and allowing, business and science and, consumers and patients to just utilize this as they see fit without interference or fear of violence from the state.
Right. It's almost like it's this big, I almost feel like it's this big, we're all running up against this dam, and it's getting more and more difficult for the dam not to break.
Sure.
And eventually, and maybe you can even make a case it has, maybe that first crack is already there. Maybe a couple of cracks are already there. But if we all just keep pushing, right? And we got amazing folks like Eric and Veterans Cannabis Coalition doing some other heavier lifting. We might damn well get there.
It is a collective effort.
Yep.
I mean, there's three things that change like generational, that create like generational type change. And this is generational.
Oh, yes.
Prohibition has existed for 80 years and, and the war on drugs for 50.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean? So that's not going to change. That obviously has not changed overnight.
Correct.
And it will not change overnight. There will be increments to get there. And we have not really seen some of the,
we haven't
the needed steps have not been attained yet. But
we know them. We can talk about them at least.
Right. You can identify them.
Yes, but
but now comes the hard part, right? And this is
execution.
It's execution. It's basically like, who's going to do it?
Yep.
Because there's not like a lot of people that can do this.
That's right.
Do this work or fund or come up with the funding or the other resources necessary to change minds. Because this politics is transactional. Cannabis industry is worth billions of dollars. Cannabis industry is not giving, a commensurate amount of money to the politicians that have their future in their hands, which to me is just mind-boggling. Right?
Yeah.
Like, why wouldn't you do what every other business does and lobby heavily? Pharma and insurance have spent, I think, $6 billion in the last 20 years in lobbying.
Yes, a lot.
And what have they got out of that $6 billion in lobbying? I don't know, hundreds of billions of dollars in like runaway profits and bailouts and all sorts of stuff. So it's like cannabis can get there too. You just have to get, a constituency.
What a fantastic point that is. That is just a fantastic point. Like, why are we looking at it as like, woe is me? Right? We have money.
Why can't we be like corn and soy?
Right. Why couldn't we be?
Or pharma or anything else?
Because ultimately, isn't it a commodity?
It is a commodity, but it's so much more too, right?
Yeah.
So it does make
that's why it's tricky.
Right. It does make it difficult to sort of like put cannabis in just one like bucket industrial box.
You can. And I think that, and to be fair, I guess, and we're going to be fair to everybody involved, that could be part of the reason why things get mucky, is because it's not, straight this, straight that, straight this. It's multiple industries.
Right. If you could cure cancer with corn, right?
Yeah.
Then I imagine corn would not be just treated the same way that it is today, right?
Right.
So I guess
there you
to
go.
your point.
Yes. And so I think, it's just interesting that I think a lot of people don't recognize the true barriers,
right?
In a lot of ways. Like we just figure, or you just kind of paraphrase it in a way in your head. You're just like, it's because we have too many of these kind of folks in office. Really? Maybe that's true to some extent, but we also have a lot more control and a lot more, if we can organize correctly.
That's the key.
And so hence the need for a place like the Veterans Cannabis Coalition.
Yeah, I mean, and beyond veterans, right? I mean, because none of the issues that veterans deal with are unique to veterans. Either mental health, physical health, the societal, psychosocial issues, homelessness and everything, housing and employment. All those things go into the overall individual's health, right? Yeah. And they're all important, and you really can't have look at one and not try to treat the others, right? Because they're all intertwined.
Yeah.
And cannabis is not obviously a silver bullet to those very complex issues. However, it is a far better alternative than what we have now.
Well, and if you let us study it a little more and you let us kind of get after it a little more, maybe there are some silver bullets there. And I
have no doubt.
Right? I don't know.
I truly believe it's a revolution in industry and pharmacology in the wings.
Right? It is. In a way, it's a really exciting time, obviously for that reason, but it's also a very important time. And it's important that we support, especially you owners out there, and especially you guys who can move the needle. Take a look at Eric and take a look at Veterans Cannabis Coalition. Before we get out of here, let's make sure that everybody knows where to find you and the VCC.
Great. So we're at www.veteranscannacoalition.org. We're on IG and Facebook under the same Veterans Canna Coalition. We also have, if you're interested in taking action and supporting some bills that are currently before Congress, one of them, the MORE Act, and another is just more of a general campaign to get more veteran representation on cannabis in front of Congress. You can text VCC, that's Victor Charlie Charlie, to 52886, and it'll send you a link, and you can follow that link, and you can send pre-formatted or write your own letters to your member of Congress based on your zip code.
You can also find that link in the description of this very show, this very episode. So you'll be able to find it there as well. Eric, thank you so much for being here. I definitely look forward to having you again. And it's a pleasure as always.
Great. Thank you, Brian.
Take care. See you guys soon.